The cup was 3/4 full when it tipped, and Naomi Carter knew before it hit him exactly what it was going to cost her. It was not the coffee that ruined her. It was the silence that came after. The kind of silence that does not belong in a café, the kind that belongs in a sentencing room, in a wine cellar, in the half-second before a trigger gets pulled. She had served 2,000 cups of coffee in this place. She had memorized the exact tilt of every saucer, the precise wrist angle that kept the cream from breaking the surface. She had moved through morning rush hours and Tuesday afternoon lulls and Sunday brunches with a kind of practiced invisibility that had become, over 11 months, the closest thing she had to safety. And then, a man she had never seen before turned his head a 1/4 inch at the exact wrong moment, and the entire architecture of her invisible life collapsed into the lap of a $3,000 suit. The café itself was called The Lantern, but the regulars knew it by another name. A glass-fronted confessional where Chicago's quietest power brokers came to drink small Americanos and pretend they had nothing to do with the headlines that broke at 6 a.m. The walls were paneled in dark walnut imported from a forest nobody could name. The light fixtures, brass and amber, threw shadows that flattered ugly men and ruined honest ones. At 9 in the morning, on a Thursday in November, the café held 43 people. 42 of them were doing exactly what they had come here to do, folding newspapers, signing documents, smiling at the wrong people for the right reasons. The 43rd was the man Naomi had just baptized in dark roast. He did not move. That was the first thing she registered. The first thing anyone with sense would have registered. A normal man, a banker, a lawyer, a tourist from Lincoln Park would have flinched. He would have hissed through his teeth. He would have stood up, swiped at the spreading stain, called her something unkind in the language of men who have never learned to hold a temper. This man did none of those things. He sat. He breathed once, slowly, through his nose. He turned his head and looked at her, and Naomi understood in the space of that look that she had spent her whole life misunderstanding what stillness actually was. Stillness was not the absence of motion. Stillness was a decision. Stillness was a man choosing not to do something in a room full of people who would have been safer if he had. Her hand was still on the saucer. The ceramic was warm. She could feel her own pulse in the bone behind her ear. "I'm so sorry," she said. The words came out flat, because she had said them so many times in so many jobs to so many men that her mouth produced them now without consulting her brain. Let me get you a cloth, sir. I'm so sorry." He raised one finger. That was all. A single finger, lifted maybe an inch off the white tablecloth. And every conversation in the café went out like a candle. Naomi had been a waitress for 11 months. Before that, she had been other things. Before that, she had been a woman with a name nobody at the Lantern would have recognized. A woman with a degree she had paid for in blood and her father's silence. A woman who could read a room the way other women read a paperback. That woman had been buried, very deliberately, 11 months ago in a courthouse in Houston. The woman standing here now, wearing the black apron and the white shirt and the small enamel name tag that said Naomi in a font she had not chosen, was supposed to be no one. That was the whole point. That was the entire architecture of survival. But the woman she had buried in Houston had known what a raised finger meant in a room full of armed men. And as the silence pressed against the windows of the Lantern, Naomi's body began to remember things her uniform was not allowed to remember. She scanned before she could stop herself. 2 men at the back booth, faces angled toward the door. Coats not removed despite the heat. One left-handed, The holster bulge sat on his right hip, one older, calmer, watching her through the reflection in his water glass instead of directly. 3 more men spaced through the caf, one at the counter, one near the kitchen entrance, one positioned exactly where someone would stand if they had been told to keep a sight line clear between the front door and the man she had just spilled coffee on. 6 men. Not counting him. The math arrived behind her eyes before she could stop it. This was not a man having coffee. This was a man holding court. And she had just walked into the middle of his sermon with a saucer she could not keep steady. He was speaking now, quietly, not to her. His voice was low, unhurried, and the syllables came out in a language she had not heard spoken aloud in a long time. Korean, specifically, the precise, clipped soul-inflected Korean of a man who had been educated abroad and trained at home. He was telling the man across from him, older, gray at the temples, expensive watch, that the meeting was suspended, that nothing further would be discussed today, that arrangements would be made. The older man nodded once, stood, buttoned his coat, and left without a word. Naomi understood every syllable. She did not let it show on her face. 11 months of practice did not abandon her in the moment she needed it most. She kept her eyes on the napkins she was now fumbling toward the spreading stain on his jacket. She kept her breathing even. She did not allow the recognition to reach her mouth. But somewhere underneath the apron and the name tag and the careful invisibility, the woman she had buried was sitting up in her grave. He let her dab at the jacket for exactly 7 seconds. She counted, because counting was something her body did when it could not afford to feel. Then he caught her wrist. His hand was warm. The grip was not tight. It was not even technically restraint. It was just contact. Deliberate and exact, and the message of it was that her hand was going to stop moving now, because he had decided it should. His thumb rested, almost incidentally, against the inside of her wrist, exactly over the spot where her pulse was now hammering at a tempo she could not hide. He felt it. She watched him feel it. His eyes moved from her wrist to her face. They were dark, not brown, not black, but a color that lived between them. The color of espresso when it is cooled just enough to drink. He studied her for what felt like 4 seconds and was probably 2. He did not look at her the way men looked at waitresses. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem that has just become interesting. "Stop," he said, in English. 1 word. Quiet, she stopped. The calf was watching now, not openly. None of them were rude enough or stupid enough to stare, but in the small movements that betray attention, the slight pause in the lifting of a fork, the cup that did not return to the saucer, the conversation at table 6 that had been about market futures and was now about nothing at all. Naomi could feel the weight of 42 pairs of eyes pretending not to land on her. His thumb was still on her pulse. "Look at me," he said. She looked. What she saw was not what she had expected. She had expected anger, controlled and surgical. She had expected the kind of cold contempt that men of his apparent station saved for the women who served them. She had expected to be made small. Instead, she saw something she did not have a word for, a kind of careful attention, like a man examining a piece of evidence he had not realized was in the room until that moment. He was not angry. He was not amused. He was interested, and the interest had a temperature, and the temperature was rising. His 4 words landed then, quietly, without ceremony, in a voice that did not need to be loud, because the room had already arranged itself to listen. "She belongs to me." Welcome back, my dangerous darlings and dark hour daydreamers. Before this story carries us any further into the storm, take a breath with me. make sure you've hit that subscribe button, leave a like if your heart is already in this, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this little dark romance family of ours stretches tonight. Every comment, every like, every soul who finds their quiet corner here helps us keep telling the kind of stories that don't fit anywhere else. So dim the lights, settle in, and let me show you exactly what those 4 words cost, and exactly what they were worth. Let's keep going. The 4 words were in English. That was the part that took Naomi's breath away. Not the claim itself, but the fact that he had spoken it in a language the entire Café could understand. He had been doing business in Korean, calmly and exclusively, until the moment he chose those 4 words. He had chosen English so that the older man in the camel coat at table 11 would understand, so that the 2 men at the back booth would understand, so that the bartender, the line cook visible through the kitchen pass, the woman at the counter pretending to read the wine list, all of them, would understand exactly what he had just announced. She belongs to me. He had not raised his voice to say it. He had not needed to. His hand was still on her wrist. "Sir," she managed. Her voice did not crack. She was proud of that, in some small underground part of her mind that still remembered to keep score. "Sir, I think there's been a—" No, he did not let her finish. There hasn't. His thumb shifted just slightly, on the pulse point. Her body answered before her mouth could. "What's your name?" "It's on the tag, sir. I can read." His eyes did not move from hers. "I want to hear you say it." She said it. "Naomi." "Naomi what?" She hesitated. That was the first place her practiced invisibility failed her, because the hesitation itself was information, and he caught it the way a man catches a knife by the handle without looking. "Carter," she said. "Naomi Carter." He let the name sit between them. He did not repeat it. He did not write it down. He simply absorbed it, the way a vault absorbs a deposit. Naomi Carter. His voice gave the syllables a weight she did not recognize as her own. "Sit down." I'm working, sir." "Not anymore." He looked past her, exactly once, at someone she could not see. The bartender, a man Naomi had worked beside for 11 months, a man whose daughter's name she knew, a man who had once covered her shift when her car wouldn't start, moved across the cafe floor with a kind of quiet hurry that Naomi had never seen in him. He spoke briefly to the manager. The manager did not argue. The manager did not even look at her. He took her apron off the hook where she had hung it 40 minutes earlier and folded it, carefully, as though he were folding a flag he was returning to a family. She had been fired in 10 seconds, or unfired, or moved into some category that did not have a name yet. "Sit," he said again. She sat. The chair across from him was leather, soft, recently warmed by the older man in the camel coat. The table between them was small enough that her knees were close to his, small enough that the spilled coffee had become a shared geography. He had not released her wrist. He did so now, finger by finger, deliberately, as though setting down something that belonged to him only when he chose to let it go. "My name is Han Jun-woo," he said. She did not react. She had taught herself, over 11 months, not to react to names. But somewhere inside her, the woman she had buried in Houston flinched. She knew that name. Han Jun-woo was a name that appeared in the kind of files that did not exist officially. He was the head of what the federal government called the Yongdo Network, and what the men who feared him called nothing at all, because to name him was to invite his attention. He had inherited a syndicate from a father he had reportedly killed, though no one had ever proven it, and no one ever would. He was 36 years old. He was not married. He had a brother who had died at 22 under circumstances the brother's own men refused to discuss. He was said to keep his temper the way other men kept rare books, carefully, climate-controlled, never displayed. Naomi knew this because, in another life, she had been a paralegal at a firm in Houston that had defended one of his American distributors. She had read the files her boss thought were too sensitive to leave on his desk overnight. She had memorized them, the way she memorized everything, because in the family she had come from, information had always been the closest thing to safety. And she had testified, 11 months ago, against the man her father had asked her not to testify against. And her father had stopped speaking to her. And the firm had let her go. And the man she had testified against had been acquitted on a technicality, and 3 weeks later her apartment had been broken into, and nothing had been stolen, and she had understood the message exactly. She had bought a one-way bus ticket to Chicago. She had cut her hair. She had taken a job pouring coffee in a cafe where men with too much money met to discuss things they did not want overheard. She had told herself that if she stayed quiet enough, long enough, no one would find her. And then she had spilled coffee on the most dangerous man in 3 states. "You're staring," Han Jong-woo said. "I'm sorry. Don't be." A flicker of something, not a smile, nothing as warm as that, moved at the corner of his mouth. "It tells me you know who I am." She did not answer. "That's interesting." He picked up his cup, the cup she had refilled, the cup whose contents now darkened his lapel, and drank from it as though nothing had happened at all. "Most waitresses don't know me." "I'm not most waitresses, sir, no," he said. "You're not." The two of them sat with that sentence for a moment, and the cafe around them began, very slowly, to return to motion. Conversations resumed at low volumes. Forks lifted. A laugh, quick, brittle, rose from table 9 and was hushed back down. The world was rearranging itself around the new fact of her, and Naomi could feel each adjustment as a small shift in the air pressure. "Why did you say that?" she asked. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. In English. "To the room." He set the cup down. The movement was precise. "Because 3 of the men in this cafe were going to kill you," he said, "the moment you walked out the door." She did not believe him. That was the first reaction, the disbelief, sharp and clean, because to believe him would require accepting that she had been about to die, and she was not yet ready to accept that. Then her mind, against her will, began to run the math she had refused to run. The men at the back booth, the coats they had not removed. The position of the man at the counter, exactly where someone would stand to keep a sight line clear from the front door to her. Not to him, to her. She had assumed the security was his. Of course she had. The composition of the room had assumed his presence was the reason for theirs. But the man at the counter had been there for 20 minutes before Han Jong-woo arrived. The math closed around her throat. "How?" she said. "How did you know?" "Because they made a mistake." He turned his cup, a quarter turn on its saucer. "They positioned themselves before I sat down. Professionals don't do that. Professionals enter after the target. These men entered first, which meant the target was already here." His eyes touched hers again. "Held, you came over to my table because the woman at table 4 asked for a refill. You walked the long way. You did not look at the men at the back booth. But you did not turn your back to them either. You held the coffee pot in your left hand because your right was closer to the apron pocket where you keep your phone." She felt the blood leave her face. "You knew they were there," he said. "You did not know who they were. But you knew." "I didn't. Don't lie to me, Naomi Carter." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Not about that. Not when I've just bought your life with 4 words. She was silent. Who do they belong to? He said. It was not really a question. It was a request for confirmation of something he had already deduced. Houston, she said, very quietly. A man in Houston. His name, Marquise Dombia. There was a pause. A flicker of recognition, fast and contained, moved across his face. He set the cup down completely, pushed it an inch to the side, and laced his fingers on the tablecloth in front of him. Dombia owes my organization $31 million, he said. I have been waiting for an opportunity to discuss the matter with him in person. You may have just provided me one. I didn't. I know you didn't. His eyes moved over her face the way they had moved over the room, registering details with quiet, surgical attention. But you are now an opportunity, and that means you are now an asset. And I do not lose assets, Naomi Carter. Especially not ones who walked the long way around the table because they wanted to see the men at the back booth without being seen looking. He stood. The 2 men at the back booth stood at the same instant. So did the man at the counter. So did the older man, his older man, who had been sitting at table 11 the whole time, who Naomi had not registered as part of his security because the man had been reading a newspaper too convincingly. 5 of his people. She had counted 6 earlier, but she had been counting wrong. She had counted 3 of Dombia's men as his. The remaining 3, the actual 3, the ones who were here for her, had not moved. They could not move. Because Han Jong-woo's men had positioned themselves in the 7 minutes since he had said she belongs to me in a configuration that made movement statistically unwise. Walk with me, he said. He extended his hand, not to take her wrist this time, to offer. She looked at the hand. She thought about the bus ticket she had bought 11 months ago. She thought about her father's voice on the phone, the last time she had heard it, telling her she was throwing her life away for a principle that would not protect her. She thought about the apartment that had been broken into, and the nothing that had been stolen, and the message she had understood without needing to be told. She had run for 11 months. She had run until running had become a way of life. And running had brought her here, to a café in Chicago, where the man across the room from her had just bought her life with 4 words and was now offering her a hand that came with a weight she had not yet measured. She took the hand. They walked out of the lantern together, and the 3 men who had come for her did not move. And Naomi understood, with the specific clarity that comes only in moments when the body knows more than the mind, that she had just stepped across a line she would not be able to step back over. The car was already at the curb. Black, German. The kind of car that did not exist in catalogs. The older man, his older man, the one with the newspaper, opened the back door without ceremony. Han Jong-woo did not get in first. He held the door for her. That detail, small and deliberate, undid her in a way she did not want to examine yet. She slid into the back seat. The leather was warm. The air smelled of cedar and something darker beneath, something expensive and unfamiliar. He got in beside her. The door closed. The car moved. "You're shaking," he said. She had not noticed. She looked down at her hands and found them trembling in her lap, small and exact, the way her hands had shaken in the courthouse in Houston when the verdict came in. He did not take her hand. He did not offer comfort. He simply said, "It will pass." The shaking is your body realizing it survived. She turned her face toward the window. Chicago slid past in gray and amber. The rain that had been threatening all morning was beginning now, fine and slow, marbling the glass. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My home." "For how long?" "For as long as it takes me to determine," he said, how Marquise Dombia learned you were in Chicago, and what to do about it. She turned to look at him. He was watching the city, not her. His profile in the gray window light was extraordinary, in a way that had nothing to do with handsomeness. It was the face of a man who had decided, very young, that he would never again allow his face to give anything away. And then, he said, you and I will have a longer conversation about why a woman who reads Korean and watches doorways and walks the long way around tables took 11 months to be found by people she clearly knew were looking for her. He turned his head, finally, and met her eyes. There was something underneath the stillness, not warmth, not yet, but the beginning of a question he had not finished asking himself. You are not what I expected to find in that café this morning, Naomi Carter. She held his gaze. The woman she had buried in Houston was fully awake now, standing in her grave, dusting off her hands. You're not what I expected either, she said quietly. Sir, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, closer to a recognition. Don't call me sir, he said. Not anymore. The car turned north. The rain thickened. And Naomi Carter, who had spent 11 months making herself into nothing, sat in the back of a stranger's car and watched the city she had hidden and disappear behind her, and understood, with the same quiet, surgical clarity she had once used to memorize files her boss thought she could not read, that her life of invisibility had ended at 9:07 a.m. on a Thursday in November, in the 7 seconds it took for a saucer to slip and a cup to fall. He had bought her life with 4 words. She did not yet know what the price would be, but she knew, sitting beside him as the car moved through the rain toward a place she had not chosen and could not refuse, that whatever the price was, she was going to be able to pay it. Because she was not a waitress. She never had been.